Wow. That was beautiful. Thank you. My name is Steve Pantilat. I am the director of the palliative care program at UCSF, and it's really a delight to be here to get to share the evening with all of you tonight. I want to thank Bruce and Jane for the very kind invitation, for the Hellman family for this wonderful program, and many colleagues and friends who are here tonight. Abraham Lincoln said, "It's not the years in your life, but the life in your years that matters." And whether we measure life in years, or sometimes, as for our patients, we measure it in months or weeks or even days, our goal is always to help people have the best possible quality of life for as long as possible. And that's what we do in the palliative care program as a team. And the goal is the same for any of us, to have the best quality of life for as long as possible. And it's especially true when we're dealing with serious illness, whether it's dementia or heart failure or cancer. The question is, how do we have the best quality of life? How do we fill our years with good life? It's appropriate when we think about poetry and the end of life to think about metaphor. I always think that poetry speaks to us in many ways as metaphor, and I want to share one with you that has to do with the work that we do, and it's about a plane. So imagine that your life is a plane flight. And if your life is a plane flight, you realize that you sort of need a lot of attention from the pilot when you first take off. And that's true when we're born. There's often a need for some medical care, potentially, maybe, when we take off. But then generally things are pretty smooth flying, a little bit of turbulence here and there. The challenge, of course, is that in American medicine, we think we can just keep the plane up forever. And we don't think that planes have to land. But of course, we all recognize that planes all have to land. And the challenge with thinking that you can keep the plane up forever is that what happens when the fuel runs out is that the plane crashes and burns on the runway. And the passengers inside, the patient, their family, their loved ones, are casualties of the crash. And in our field of palliative care, we try to think about how can we bring the plane in for a soft and safe landing. And how do we prepare for that landing so we land at the right airport, at the right time, and in the right way? And that's a metaphor that I find helpful in thinking about the work that we're trying to do and in thinking about what we're trying to achieve, that soft landing. And palliative care is a field that thinks about the soft landing. And palliative care, the work that I do, the program that I direct, is care that we provide as a team. It's a team sport. Doctors, nurses, social workers, chaplains, pharmacists who come together to think, how can we provide the best possible care to our patients and their families? And we really provide expertise in 3 areas. Our job 1 is really around pain and symptoms, about shortness of breath and nausea and fatigue, and how do we help people feel well in their bodies? Recognizing that if we're in pain or if we have nausea, we can't really think about the things that are important. We can't say the goodbyes that really matter to us. And so our expertise really first and foremost is focused on that. But we also realize that beyond that, once we get beyond that, there's a lot else to think about and to talk about. And the other expertise that we bring to bear is in how we talk with people. How do we understand what it is that somebody really wants and what's important to us as we face the end of life? What are the decisions we want to make? What are the treatments that are right for us? And when we talk about those treatments, we think of them not only in terms of medical care, but in terms of a whole person, of the entire person within the context of our lives. One gentleman we took care of, he was in his 60s, he was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. And when I talked to him about this, I said, "What's important to you? What do you hope will happen?" He said, "Well, I'll tell you, I haven't been to my hometown in a long time. And I've thought I really want to go back and visit my hometown and see my old friends." And we talked about that in terms of his treatment. What did that mean for his chemotherapy that he was thinking about? And the more we talked about it, we realized that it was better to go first to make the visit. because it's possible that the chemotherapy would make him so sick that he couldn't do that. And his oncologist said there was no harm in waiting. And it wasn't about whether the tumor had a certain genetic profile, and it wasn't about where exactly it had spread. It was really trying to understand what was important to him as an individual. We think about it as the ultimate in personalized medicine because it's directed at the person, at the whole person, and not just as at a disease. And then we think about how do we provide support? How do we provide support, social support, psychological support, spiritual support, recognizing that illness and the end of life is not a biologic process exclusively, but really is a process that we all go through in many different ways with many different experiences. We think about the heart, the mind, the soul, the spirit. And that's why we practice as a team in order to address all those issues for patients and families. Now, if we provide care like that, that's really focused on symptoms and taking away pain and shortness of breath and helping people make decisions that are really important to them and supporting them in that way, does it make a difference? And I'm really pleased to be able to tell you that it makes a tremendous difference and that that's been studied here at UCSF and at other places. People with lung cancer who were treated at Harvard, which apparently is a very good place to get care, I understand. Not UCSF, but still quite good. People with lung cancer there, newly diagnosed lung cancer that was not curable. All of them received good cancer care at Harvard. Half of them also received palliative care. And the people who received palliative care, they had less pain, they had less depression, they had a better quality of life, and they lived longer by almost 3 months in a disease where people die on average at 9 months. So it makes a tremendous difference. And let me just say, I just want to say that again, because I think we often think that there's a trade-off between quality and quantity of life. And what we're finding is that quality produces quantity of life, and that it's not a trade-off. And any thought that there's a trade-off is really a false trade-off, because we can achieve both. At UCSF in our palliative care program, we try to provide that care to our patients in the hospital, in the clinic, and at home. I'm proud to say that in March we will celebrate our 15th year of the palliative care program in the hospital, and I'm really delighted that some of us old-timers, I'm now an old-timer, are here who started this program long ago. Carol Mowbray, who was the nurse manager on our unit when it started, Steve McPhee, Mike Rabo. We teach the next generation of doctors, nurses, social workers, chaplains. We will not change healthcare until we change the way everyone is trained. And I think it's really telling, Bruce, when you shared the story that you didn't learn anything about palliative care. I went to medical school just a few years after you. I didn't learn anything about palliative care either. But I can tell you that today our medical students learn a lot about palliative care. And they rotate with us on our service, which has become one of the most popular electives in the medical school. And we teach nurses and social workers and chaplains as well. We also do research, being at UCSF, to try and understand what's the best way to provide this care, to relieve those symptoms, to communicate clearly. And finally, we think about how do we share that knowledge that we have with others so that we can really change the system. We want to make care as good as we can make it here at UCSF, but we recognize we also want to make care better for everyone across the state, across the country. And these practical matters are really important. It matters how you treat pain, and it matters how we talk to patients, and it matters that we have social workers and chaplains on our team who can address these issues. But we realize, and I think apropos of this evening, that the practical only gets you so far. And that when we think about the end of life, we also have to recognize the mystery and the universal experience of it, the spiritual and the sacred. And this is really where poetry has so much to offer us, not only in medicine broadly, but especially at the end of life. Where metaphor and language can speak directly to the heart and bypass some of the barriers that we often put up in not wanting to talk about these issues and not wanting to face the end of our life. Ways that we can get in and get directly to the heart. Poetry does that. It speaks directly to the heart. and allows us to engage our head and our heart. And I think apropos of our dedicating this evening to Nelson Mandela, I just want to share a quote. Nelson Mandela said, "A good head and a good heart are a powerful combination." And that's true. And I learned that from my dear friend and mentor, Steve McPhee, who taught me that if we're really going to make a change, we have to appeal to both the head and the heart. So we read poetry. We read poetry on rounds before we talk about patients. We read poetry at our team meetings. We read poetry at conferences and lectures. I read poetry in medical school. I never heard a poem in medical school, but I now read poems in medical school. And we even read them at the bedside because of their power. And the poems really speak to us in a different way. And I think about it, if taking the plane analogy again, we can understand aerodynamics, and we can understand airflow, and understand with our head how a plane flies. And yet, I never cease to wonder that a 747 can lift up off the ground. And so we can have the wonder and the mystery along with the knowledge. So Margaret Mead was giving a lecture, and at the end of the lecture, she took questions, and someone raised a hand and asked her, what is the earliest sign of civilization that she knows? Expecting that she might say pottery, tool, something like that. And she said a healed femur from 15,000 years ago. So the femur is the big, long bone in your thigh. She said, we uncovered a healed femur, and that is the sign of civilization. The person was very curious, how is that a sign of civilization? She explained that 15,000 years ago, if you broke your femur, you would die unless a community took care of you. That in order to survive the 6 to 10 weeks it would take to heal that fracture, you needed to be cared for by a community. They needed to protect you from predators. They needed to provide you with food and shelter. And it's that caring for each other that is the first demonstration of civilization. And when I think about palliative care and how we take care of each other, how we take care of patients who are seriously ill and approaching the end of life, I think that the important word in palliative care is actually the care part. And that how we care for each other matters tremendously to each of us. It matters to our institutions. It matters to our society. And we think about that in the work that we do every day, to think how can we take care of each other in a way that provides comfort and dignity and meaning. Thank you very much.